In my first foray into EU5 as the great Tenochtilan, what would be my biggest challenge? Overcoming the impending doom? Fighting off the great pestilence? Dealing with the colonizers' conquistadors? Or perhaps something even more insidious and powerful? As I plan to, since I first saw the Tinto flavor talk for Tenochtitlan, my first campaign in EU5 would be as them. I love playing in this region in EU4. There were so many clever strategies to use, and Winds of Change brought some crazy power creep and exploits that were fun to play with, even when not starting in the area. I knew it probably wouldn't be as fully baked as some other areas in the game, like Europe, but since Tenochtitlan had 16 unique events and 12 country bonuses, I figured it was at least play tested to some degree. I did 3 separate campaign starts, refining my strategy and knowledge each time, since I was learning the game from scratch. I'll mostly focus on this last run, though reference the others as a comparison. This will be part guide, part playthrough, and part venting. Most of it was played on 1.04, but the 1.05 patch came out partway through, and you'll see that it was not a wise decision to upgrade to it. The game is going through some knee-jerk balancing updates, so anything you see in this video might not work the same way in your game. Tenochtitlan starts as a subject. Like in EU4, you can gather allies to support your independence, which I originally did, but that takes considerable time to raise opinions and get support. Plus, with military access being so restrictive, you're really limited as to who you can invite who will actually join the fight. It's ultimately easier to mostly just do it yourself. First though, I had to sow disloyalty using my strongest advisor so that I could become disloyal. There's very little margin here, so as soon as you become disloyal and have a CB, you want to declare because one event can easily send you back to being loyal. If you get an event that gives you doom, I would take it because it will increase your disloyalty and it's pretty easy to get rid of at this point. I declare for independence and move my standing army and levies into my overlord and their other subject before they can raise any levies themselves, using some careful back and forth movement to reset their levy creation. Once everything is occupied, it's just waiting for siege ticks. As an Altepital government, you cannot take land for yourself, so your only choice is to turn the tables and subjugate your overlord and their vassal too. Later you can seize territory from them, which I recommend to help increase your relative strength and economy. From there, it's all about building the vassal swarm, but it's important to understand the religion first. The Nahua Religion uses the Doom mechanic like in EU4. As it increases, you get decreased subject loyalty, increased stability decay, and decreased estate satisfaction equilibrium. And if you happen to hit 100 Doom, your ruler and your dynasty all die. I do not recommend this. The more land you own, the more your monthly Doom tick will increase, so that has to be balanced appropriately. Increasing your legitimacy, stability, as well as some other modifiers can help offset the Doom increase. You'll want to integrate some vassals so you have more resources to work with, as well as making your relative strength to your vassals bigger, but not so much that your Doom increase becomes strongly positive. You start with 6 gods whose modifiers you always receive and are all the same as the religious aspects except for one, which may be a bug. You can then pick a god to worship as part of your religious aspect. Starting out, I like either the prosperity or monthly diplomats. You'll never get any war exhaustion in the first 200 years, and you don't need army strength with your vassal swarm, and as such, the army maintenance is an insignificant cost. You will run out of things to research long before you can get a second institution, so research progress in the early game is a waste. The population growth is too small to be worth it in my opinion. In my last game, I started with the prosperity god, then switched to the monthly diplomats and colonial maintenance when I started colonizing. There are also 8 religious focuses that you need to research to eventually reform your religion. When those are complete, you can reform society, and you'll enter a 10-year disaster where you have to centralize and consolidate your power. You get a powerful new reform, and you annex other nations with the occipital government reform. The most important part is that the doom mechanic is supposed to go away. The two most important religious focuses are legal reforms, which allows you to get the legalism institution, and institute the flower wars, which gives you an instant CB on a native country with a 3-year refresh time. I prefer taking legalism first because you can unlock an extra government reform. After those two, the rest you can take in any order, as I don't think they're that impactful. It's worth noting each of them have different elements that help speed up their progress, so it's worth checking that to see if there are things you can do to speed them up. With that all explained, it's time to get to Conquest. Your default government reform allows slave raiding, which allows you to get slaves and an easy-to-progress CB that you can get almost anyone. You want to start with smaller countries near you so you can build up a strong vassal base. Note that as a native, in any peace deal, you have the option to subjugate neighbor native, which allows you to subjugate the country for a flat 75% war score. This allows you to make literally every native in a new world your subject. The antagonism is not so bad either. A typical peace deal for me involves subjugation, humiliation for prestige, and money or war reps. Don't worry about antagonism from non-co-belligerents. You want to separate peace and subjugate everyone you attack. This will be the main game loop for the first 50 years. Eventually, with all these subjugations, I piss off enough people to get them motivated to form a coalition. This is perfectly fine, and even preferable. At this point in time, I had a dozen or more subjects, and with my levies, I knew I could easily take on 10 countries at once. So I let the coalition size get to about 10 members, and then I declare on one of them, bringing them all in. Unlike in EU4, you can separate peace coalition members if you were the one to declare the war. I take my doom stack, and take out each country one by one. Because of only needing 75% war score, you can usually subjugate a nation just by occupying their lands, even if their army is untouched. After enough wars, I have so many vassals, it's difficult to keep them loyal. Obviously, I'm trying to improve opinion with as many of them as possible. Some of the bigger ones, I support their loyalists, as that gives 20 loyalty for the cost of 0.1 monthly diplomats. I would recommend keeping your decentralization high in the early part of the campaign, as it gives 20 subject loyalty at max, though you'll eventually need to switch to centralization. Conciliatory also gives 10 subject loyalty. That and the 4 dip rep makes it a good choice for as long as you have the vassal swarm. There's also the fixed vassal obligations reform that gives 10 loyalty. With all of this, it's quite possible to keep dozens of subjects loyal in peacetime. As the years progress, you will want to integrate some of the vassals near you so you can build up your land. This will make you stronger in the eyes of your vassals and keep them more loyal. But be watchful that your size does not get so large that you start getting ticking doom. At some point, you might think you should take your foot off the brake, but I disagree. In peacetime, there will still be a lot of loyal subjects giving you money, and you can build up your standing army to be way bigger than any of theirs, which rarely go over 600, and many have none at all, giving you another boost to your relative strength calculation. Wars are a little tricky because everyone builds their levies, and you become relatively less powerful in their eyes, so they become disloyal, and your economy goes through a mini crash. However, it's not a big deal, as most wars are over very quickly, and there's always some vassals that are loyal to help you out. Though if you've integrated enough land, you should have plenty of levies yourself to handle anyone. You should always be going to war as often as your generation of CBs will allow. I've never had any vassal try for their independence for what it's worth. Here I am, just under 60 years into the game, with all of Mesoamerica under my control. Chol is a tributary of Kokom, and unfortunately there's no way for me to take it. I've gone to war with it, but I don't get any peace options to subjugate them, since they are a vassal of my vassal, but that's a problem for a different time. As you can see, during peacetime, everyone is loyal, and they're giving me nearly half of my income. I don't own a ton of land, but enough to be powerful and have decent control over most of it. At this point, there's 3 objectives. 1, build the economy up as strong as possible. 2, explore the rest of the Americas. And 3, colonize. These are all tied together. For the economy, one giant obstacle for playing in this area is the lack of certain resources and the inability to develop others because of missing advances. There's only one tin resource in all of America, and you won't get there until you're deeply colonizing. There is more iron, but none in the starting areas. And even when you colonize these locations, you can't build RGO levels until you get more institutions. As such, you need to resource your tools from stone instead of iron. It's very, very easy to get into a resource spiral where you build more stone so you can build more tools, then you build more tools so you can get more stone, then you increase lumber so you can build more stone and weaponsmiths, and more tools so you can get more lumber, and so on. A huge drawback of being in this resource spiral is that your colonial charters rely on weapons and will not increase in size if it's lacking them, but you're still paying the maintenance costs. I struggled with this for quite a while until things finally clicked. I started focusing on building up my RGOs first, since they didn't require extra resources, but would give me income and useful resources. I either shut down my masons or moved their production method to use clay instead of stone. From integrations, I had quite a few of the unique warrior temples, and they have a massive upkeep of 1 weapon per month. I either deleted them or closed them down. Same with stockades, clay pits, which use wood, villages, which use tools or lumber, irrigation, which again use tools, and any burger buildings that use lumber or tools, focusing instead on tailors and spinners for commercial buildings. With those resources limited, I was able to close down some of my weaponsmiths and still provide enough for my colonial charters. I still built temples and bridges as I felt they were worth the cost for the benefit. With all these changes, I finally had a relatively balanced economy, with demand only occasionally eclipsing supply. Because of trade income raising the cost of various expenses to the point of it not being economically viable, I imported some resources like stone and pop needs like furniture or pottery. When I upgraded to 1.05, the trade maintenance bug made it so that these import expenses were actually giving me money instead of being a loss, but I wasn't complaining. As for exploring, you can spy on existing countries to get their maps, but you can't get maps from your vassals, a big regression from EU4. However, why would you want to let a country exist and not be your vassal? That's just madness. Instead, go to the Society of Pops-based country map mode and find a Society of Pops that is near the area you want to explore and spy on them. By doing this, you can uncover all of North America, the Caribbean, and large parts of South America. I wasn't able to get all of South America because of diplomatic range at the start, but once you get some colonies, you will be able to. For colonial charters, make sure most start adjacent to your existing land, as that proximity keeps the costs low. Now would be a good time to switch your patron god to the one with colonial maintenance reduction if you didn't have it already. The charters always cost 250 gold to start, and the monthly maintenance increases by 10% for each charter you have. As such, you don't want to start too many because you'll have to decrease your colonial maintenance slider to stay afloat, which will just lengthen the time you're paying for all those charters. Only start the number of charters that you can maintain at full cost. Focus on charters that have high populations. There's a lot in the Central American region, but the west and south coasts are pretty bare by comparison. You'll get a lot more benefit from having cores in these high pop locations than simply spreading your land reach. During this time of strengthening your economy, I make an effort to cap out my stability and legitimacy, as they'll have strong bonuses and also lower ticking doom so I can integrate a little bit more land. In 1435, just before the Age of Discovery, I was finally able to hit the button to reform society. This starts a 10-year disaster where I have to get my centralization societal value to 80 or higher. Because I knew this was coming, I had already started removing reforms that increased decentralization and was taking parliament requests and agendas that would increase it more. The disaster itself isn't very strong, giving 0.05 doom, some rebel growth, and lowered estate satisfaction. None of these would be an issue before the 10 years were up. With 10 years past and over 80 centralization, I finally finish the disaster and get the very strong, reformed Nahua society reform, as well as annexing most of my Otepetal vassals. Some don't get annexed, but I think that's because they were a vassal of a vassal. In any case, it's still a lot more land. Normally that would be awful, but reforming my society got rid of doom, right? Wait, it didn't? Wonderful. Now my doom is taking up a massive amount with all this new land. I'm going to die in a short amount of time. Yes, this is the first serious bug. This reform is supposed to get rid of doom, but it does not. The only solution was to give up my Iron Man game and install a mod that would counter the ticking doom. This is a confirmed bug, by the way, for those of you who think this might be unintentional. Well, not that huge a deal, but it's annoying all the same. In any case, I can now freely integrate as I please, though there's still not much point in integrating too much because I won't be able to get a lot of control in those lands. I could do it to be able to form the Aztec tag, but there's nothing unique about it for me, as all the Tenochtilan flavor is shared with the Aztec tag. Only my name would change. Nevertheless, I do want to get some more coastline so I can start building towns there, and then wharfs, and then canoes, so that I can conquer the South American natives. The Darien Gap had prevented me from making a land invasion, so that's why I need naval transport. This is pretty slow going as towns are expensive and sailor growth is minuscule, though I can steal some from my vassals. Since it's only the mid-1450s, and I have quite a few decades before there's a chance of colonizers showing up so I can get institutions from them, it's all about growing my economy and expanding my land through colonial charters. Additionally, I slowly cycle through my vassals, enforcing culture and religion on them over time. Both of these actions cause a hit of 100 liberty desire as they do become disloyal, but it ticks down at 0.5 a month. Plus it's capped, and they don't stack, so it's usually possible for me to enforce culture, wait until their negative liberty desire is around 40, and then enforce religion. By the time any colonizers show up, all my vassals will be the same culture and religion. Occasionally they do convert back, but I just enforce again. This has the bonus effect of ensuring that the populations will be more like mine when I do eventually integrate them. I routinely cycle through my vassals using the siphon income ability to get extra money. I have so much loyalty, it doesn't even bother them much. Additionally, for even more money, I sell some of my low control land and colonies to my vassals. I won't get much value out of them, but they're sometimes willing to pay hundreds or even thousands of gold for them. The most I had ever received was nearly 8k gold from Kokom. In my first game, colonizers didn't show up until the 1520s, far up north in Canada, by England. Luckily, in my last game, Castile was kind enough to show up in Cuba around the 1500s. As soon as a colonizer starts chartering the New World, the Great Pestilence situation gets a 1% monthly chance to trigger. This situation can result in a catastrophically bad outcome, or just a merely bad outcome, depending on the steps you take. The situation allows you the opportunity to take two separate actions, both with seemingly awful effects. In my first campaign, I read this saying it lasted until the end of the game, and I was definitely not going to allow that to happen. However, that is somewhat misleading. Not only will these effects be repealed when the situation ends, you can instantly repeal them after you take them. This seems like a simple thing to know, but when I first saw it, I didn't think to take the risk, and didn't know it wasn't truly until the end of the game. This is an incredibly momentous decision too, because if you select no contact with outsiders, you can lessen your deaths from the Great Pestilence by 40 to 50%. We're talking millions of people in my game here. However, do not select the spiritual option, because that actually lowers your disease resistance by 10. Since I knew it would be coming at some point in time, I made sure all my towns and cities had hospitals, and I tried to make as many towns as was feasible. I then do the extra gamey step of converting to Mayan when the Great Pestilence hits. They have a base god that gives 10 disease resistance like Nahua, but you can also select him as a patron god to get another 10 disease resistance. This is a big difference maker, and I could switch back in 10 years without any problems. The hospitals end up saving me roughly 400 to 450,000 people, and switching to Maya close to 1 million. In my first campaign, without any of these benefits, I went from a population of 10.3 million to 2.1 million after the Great Pestilence. This crippled my economy because my vassals were now super weak and I didn't have the pops to fill my buildings. It truly was apocalyptic. However, with the benefit of the knowledge I gained, in my last campaign I started with 8.3 million and only lose 3.1 million. That's a 37% loss compared to an 80% loss. Still very devastating to my country and my economy, but something that you can recover from. Unfortunately, this was also when game-breaking bug number 2 showed up. In my first campaign, the pestilence situation only lasted a few years and did infect the entire Americas. This is what I saw on a couple streams as well. However, in my second and third campaign, I noticed the situation just kept going and going, even though the disease tab showed it had ended and there were no infections present in the world. This caused repeated awful events from this situation to begin crippling my nation. That's when I did some digging and saw the situation does a check to see if the Great Pestilence has infected at least one province in the Caribbean, Mesoamerica, and the Andes. Yet, in my second game, for some reason, the Great Pestilence never went to the Caribbean. I thought that was because there were no countries or colonies there, but in my third game, it never hit the Andes. So those 3 checks that were needed for the situation to end were never all triggered, and in fact can never all be triggered because the pestilence was already done spreading. This was going to last until the end of the game. There's no way that could be the intended mechanic for this situation to potentially occur forever and yet also allow some areas to completely evade any disease at all. I think the algorithm that determines the spread is just not fully baked enough to ensure it spreads everywhere. As such, I went to the Debug Explorer and checked the relevant options so I could continue my game. Here you can see a time lapse from my third campaign. I did this just for the video, so the numbers don't quite line up, as it seems there's some variability in how many people die each time. But no matter how many times I replay the disease spread, it never goes into the Andes region. There's plenty of pops there, and the disease gets right to the border with a heavy infection, but never crosses into it for some reason. Fast forwarding 6 years, you can see that I still have the situation active, but there's no Great Pestilence affections in the world. Sadly, I was no longer a great power, but that wasn't really necessary either. All my vassals were super loyal now thanks to being weakened so much by the Great Pestilence. Now my focus was on expanding my lands as much as possible to race against the colonizers, as well as trying to catch up to them technologically. Thanks to their settlements in Colombia and Cuba, it was slowly spreading to adjacent provinces. However, I need at least 20% of my land to have it before I can embrace. So I set up my trade so that I use all my trade capacity to import from the markets where the market center has the institutions. That gets me institution adoption of over 1% a month eventually, from only 0.1 or 0.2 without those trades. In a few short years, I'm able to start finally doing new research, and I begin with feudalism. It's required for a lot of things and will have a reduced cost. I'm feeling pretty good right now because I figure I have some time to catch up on important texts, and I probably appear too big and strong to Castile for them to want to attack me outright. However, instead of attacking me directly, they send perhaps the one and only thing I truly hate about this game right now: Conquistadors. Out of nowhere, I get a notification that I've been declared on. I recognize the name, but it sounds like a vassal of mine, not a colonizer. I eventually discover that this is a conquistador army that is attempting to settle in my land. Unfortunately for me, when this first happens, I'm on the 1.05 patch that completely destroyed levies. The conquistadors only have 4k soldiers, so I get my levies and figure I can take them on. At full strength, I can barely win the battle, but I'm losing the war, as my levies lose a ton of people. Even with my vassals attaching, I keep losing more people than the conquistadors by a huge amount. That's when another conquistador army instant spawns in my lands and starts attacking, and then a third. Here's the thing, you can't piece them out, at least not without giving up land. As they are an army-based country, the only way to get rid of them fully is to completely destroy their army. But my levies are too weak to do that, especially when there's 3 separate invasions. Additionally, since I have to make my armies so large to stand a chance, they move far more slowly, and it's a massive struggle to catch up with them at any point. Since these conquistadors are essentially a horde, when they occupy a location, it becomes owned by them. Now, to piece them out, I have to occupy all their taken land and still wipe their army. I decided this is a losing situation and I wanted to try to handle it better. So I reload an old save to try again, this time on the 1.04 patch. I noticed the conquistadors have essentially the same stats as my Jaguar warriors, so I bring them up from South America. A very tedious task as I can only transport 1 regiment at a time. And I build a few more so that I have an equal size standing army to the conquistadors. When they invade again, the battles are still tough, but a little more doable, and being on 1.04, the levies are still somewhat useful as long as they greatly outnumber the conquistadors. This feels okay. It's hard, and I need overwhelming force, but it still seems doable. That's when the real bullshit comes. In the south of my nation, one of the conquistador armies had taken over a handful of locations. I eventually reoccupy those locations and whittle down their army until I finally wipe it. Hurrah, I think. Then I noticed something weird. This big purple blob where those occupied locations had been. Wait, didn't I win? Didn't I wipe their army? Why do they not only now have a nation in places I was occupying, but it also has a truce with me so I can't attack it without huge repercussions? That's when I go bug report hunting on the forums and learn that, oh, yes, this is another fun bug. If you wipe the conquistador army while they own any locations, they instantly annex all locations they ever controlled and become their own country with a truce. That shouldn't be the outcome in a situation where I was clearly victorious. So, I reload and take care to make sure I occupy all the lands. While in mid-fight, I can see my war score jump from 32 to 100. For some reason, I can peace out even though they still have some armies left. This has not always been the case. Nevertheless, I'm able to do that and think, whew, that was quite a war, but I managed to do it. With the military techs I'm learning, it should be a little easier for the next battle. That's when I noticed that I'm missing cores. Every single province the conquistadors occupied and I took back appear to be uncored with 50% separatism. Why is this the outcome? Why should cores be lost for that? After some checking, I realized that it's not quite as bad as it seems, because my vassals that still existed did have cores, and I could get the land back to them without any seeming penalty. However, in the case of Kachikal, the conquistadors had entirely occupied it, erasing all of its cores. There was nothing I could do to get cores back in the land except by someone going through the long process of integrating. Given how many vassals I had, and how many of these conquistadors I had to deal with, this didn't feel like fun any longer. In North America, Scotland was colonizing and sure to bring some conquistadors as well when they got closer to me, and the bulk of my army would be far away from them. This was only going to get worse. Also worth noting that when they occupy lands, they can and do immediately start recruiting armies out of thin air in those freshly occupied provinces. It only takes a moment for them to add a few thousand troops to their already strong army. After one of the wars finished, I did see this icon that showed a conquistador being built here somehow. It showed up during the war when they had occupied the land, and appeared to be finishing quickly at that point, so I thought it was just another army, but I wasn't sure why it was staying around. I thought maybe this was a warning of an invasion that I previously missed, but when I went back to a previous save before any of the conquistadors spawned, there was no such icon in any of the provinces. Now, I'm not claiming every aspect of this was perfectly played. I know some of these fights were not always fought in the best terrain, but I didn't feel like I had a choice. If I wasn't constantly attacking and taking back land, I'd either be taking land or building up more armies. Even though I would win most of the fights, I couldn't do enough damage most of the time, even when they were at low morale. It was whack-a-mole, and the automated hunt-down armies was not working for me either. So, to recap, I have to deal with instant spawn conquistador hordes for which I have no advance warning, which can spawn anywhere in my nation, which are hard to defeat or even follow, and if I dare to let them occupy any land for even a day, it can become completely worthless for decades. There doesn't seem to be much of a cooldown either, as I did have 3 fighting against me at one point, all from Spain, and all in less than a year. This is too much. This should be hard, but this is simply far too punitive, especially given how successful I was at developing my country. So, I threw my hands up and let EU5 knew it won.
You got me.
I would simply wait until things were in a better state. In all, I still had a pretty fun time with this campaign. Learning the base mechanics was interesting and mostly rewarding. In particular, fixing my economy felt great, and the vassals form is a lot of fun, though probably a bit too easy to get. However, the multitude of bugs, even if I could fix some, really dampened my spirits, and those conquistador hordes are really too much. I don't really like to play the realism card much, but in real life, the only reason the Spanish were able to defeat the Triple Alliance, besides disease, was because of their alliances with Triple Alliance enemies. The Spaniards themselves faced plenty of defeats even with their superior technology. So if these countries are going to be playable and have flavor too, there needs to be some work done here to make it a little more fair. In the description, I've included links to the various relevant bug reports that I came across for this campaign. I and other Mesoamerican and native enjoyers would greatly appreciate if you could upvote these bug reports. To be clear, it's the little arrow in the upper right corner of the first post, not the like buttons you can do for every post. There's been a lot of reactionary patching that feels a little too much like cowboy coding, and I think I'm going to let things cool down a bit before I jump back into EU5. Make no mistake, I'm definitely looking forward to the future of this game. That said, if you're still into EU4, I have a new World Conquest record campaign underway that I started before the EU5 release, and that should be up on the channel before the end of the year, hopefully.